Hello, everybody. Welcome in. My name is Marty Frank. I'm your facilitator today, and you are joining the Multifamily Energy Reporting and Tenant Notice Policy public meeting. The meeting will begin in just a few minutes. It'll last 1 hour. We're very glad you're here. A couple of housekeeping things as we're waiting for everybody to filter in. If you wouldn't mind, please updating your Zoom name. That's the 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner of your picture, anybody's picture. We'd love it if you would include your full name and your organization or the community or group that you are here speaking on behalf of. And you'll notice that all of the BPS city staff who are joining will have BPS or city staff in their name as well, so you can identify them. And I also want to let everybody know that we are going to be using the chat feature today to take questions. So just want to make sure everybody knows where the chat is. At the bottom of your Zoom window, you have a bunch of buttons. And so you have one that says chat with a little comment bubble in it. So welcome, and we'll just hang out and wait maybe 1 or 2 more minutes and make sure everybody's here before we get started. Okay, thank you to those of you who I've seen are renaming yourself so that we can tell who you're representing or the organizations you're with. We appreciate that. If anybody has any technical issues today with Zoom, you can see in the chat feature there's the ability to message everyone in the meeting, and you can also message Wing. Wing is doing technical support today, so please message Wing if you have any technical issues or questions. And when we come to the Q&A time, when you do have a question, we're going to ask you to message everyone in the meeting, and that makes sure that all the city staff who need to see your questions will be able to see them. Okay, I think it seems like we don't have anybody new filtering in. Vin, Andrea, are you okay getting started?
Sure, thanks.
Wonderful. Okay, so for anybody who may have just come in, you are joining the Multifamily Energy Reporting and Tenant Notice Policy public meeting. We will be together for about 1 hour today. We're very happy to have you all here. And I would like to start by asking the city staff who are present to introduce themselves. So I'd like to ask Vin, would you start? And then we can move on to Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for being here. I'm Ben Mason, and I work for the City of Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. I use he, him pronouns. I am the project lead for the development of this policy. I will pass it to Brian.
Hi, Brian Garcia. I'm with the Commercial Building Energy Reporting Help Desk and also manage the Energy Score programs, he, him, and I will pass it on to Eli.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eli Bonilla. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the communication strategist for the climate team. And tonight I'll be helping share your questions from the chat with our staff. Pass it on to Michelle.
Michelle, you might be muted.
My apologies, Michelle DePass. I'm on the BPS climate team, and I'm here to monitor the chat today, and I'll pass it on to Andrea.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Jacob. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the climate program manager at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. So our job as a team, as a climate team, is to implement the climate emergency work plan. This is the city's adopted climate action plan, and buildings are a really important part of that. It's a big part of the local carbon emission picture, and it also is intersectional with a lot of our work on anti-displacement and housing. So thank you for being here and spending your lunch hour with us. We promise to make good use of your time, and we'll go from here. Thanks, Marty.
Okay. Thank you. I noticed there's a couple of people who've just come in, so I'll ask you all, if you've just arrived, if you could make sure to have your full name and your organization or affiliation in your Zoom name. That's really helpful to us. Okay, so the Multifamily Energy Reporting and Tenant Notice Policy, you may hear us refer to it as Multifamily Energy or MF Energy. We're here today so that you all can hear from city staff about this policy and pose your questions to them. Let me make an important distinction, though, that any questions you ask today through the chat are not official comments on this policy. Those questions essentially stay in this room. So I'm putting into the chat now a link to the MAP app. If you want to make an official comment on this policy, you need to do it through the MAP app. So if you click this link, you will pull up a web page that then allows you to pose a comment on the policy. And I'll put this link into the chat a couple more times if it gets lost up, kind of in the barrage of questions that I know you all are going to be sending to us, and remind you about that. So the structure of our time is really in two segments. We're going to start by focusing on the energy reporting requirements of the policy. So Vin will give us a short presentation, and then we'll take questions on that energy reporting requirements. And I want to invite you to put your questions into the chat starting right now, at any point during Vin's presentation or after, when we're actually actively engaging in answering your questions. So after the energy reporting piece, we will move on to focus on the tenant notice requirements. And same thing, Vin will give us a short presentation explaining those requirements, and then we will do questions and answers. And again, reminding you to please use the MAP app, however, for any official comments. So with that being said, Vin, I would like to turn the floor over to you to talk to us about the energy reporting requirements.
Great, thank you, Marty. Let's start sharing my screen here. How does that look, Marty? Good, okay, thanks. All right, everyone. So again, I work for the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. I've been with the city and the Bureau since 2007, and I'm a senior climate policy advisor, specializing in equitable building decarbonization policy development and implementation. So scores, labels, and ratings are a regular part of how we communicate information, like movie ratings for our children, and energy guide labels on appliances to make informed consumer decisions. So this label, if you haven't seen it before, these are federally required labels for appliances. They indicate a few things here, like what the potential costs would be for using that appliance over the course of the year, in this case, $33, the energy use, 313 kilowatt hours. And it provides gives you a sense of where it lands relative to other appliances. So we have something similar on the whole building level in Portland. It's called the Home Energy Score. This is for single family homes. Currently, the city requires sellers to disclose home energy scores at time of listing to inform prospective buyer decisions. Since 2018, over 4,000 Portland homes have been scored, and this home energy score measures the energy efficiency of a single family home on a scale of 1 to 10 and estimates annual energy costs. So you can see in this case, this home example has a score of 4, and the estimated energy cost based on the systems that are within that home is $1,688 per year. So that gives the homeowner a sense of what they might expect in terms of costs. The city also requires, like to the right of the home energy score, requires a commercial building energy reporting for buildings that are over 20,000 square feet or 20,000 square feet and larger. So this is also called benchmarking, where the building manager estimates key information and then reports that to the city annually. Since 2015, property managers have submitted reports for over 1,000 commercial buildings in Portland. The city discloses this key information on an interactive map to inform prospective buyer and tenant decisions, and that information are metrics like carbon emissions, energy use, and Energy Star scores. So you can see the Energy Star label here that's very similar to what's on the appliance label. They both come out of the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C. And in the case of buildings, if the score is, the scale is 1 to 100 on the building level for commercial buildings, And if the score is 75 or higher, that building is eligible for Energy Star certification. So that's a way to gain market distinction for exemplary performance. To date, over 180 buildings have been certified Energy Star in Portland, and every year we highlight the top 10 on our map. Generally, the energy scores help the city measure progress toward our climate goals, but I do want to note that we have a data gap for multifamily apartments and condominiums. This is somewhat intentional because the home energy scoring program and the commercial building program go back to the mid 2010s at a time when our bureau was also going on an equity journey of how to be more equitable about our policy development. And so we very intentionally wanted to spend some time to engage communities of color, in particular in Portland, to get a sense for what their priorities are. So from 2018 to 2022, we had a community-led process through the Coalition of Communities of Color and Verde, bringing together a community team to help gather more information to really inform things like energy cost burden for low-income renters. And the priority there was really to focus on rental housing out of all the different types of buildings that are out there, and to really be thinking about low-income renters. So out of that process came a policy concept. We then brought that policy concept as the Bureau to other stakeholders, including building owners and managers, to get feedback on that. And that was throughout 2022, a bit into 2023 as well. And then in 2023, we spent quite a bit of time also looking at an economic analysis that is ongoing right now and technical analysis to really look at what's the potential costs to meet the city's long-term goals of net zero carbon, but also to look at the potential costs that may pass through from property managers to renters. So the goal being here to prevent displacement. So then now bringing us into 2024, I wanted to note that much of our work that we are currently analyzing is on hold in terms of moving the policy forward. And that's largely due to the state having its own building energy performance standards that some of you may have heard of. And so we are working very closely with the state on these new rules that came from House Bill 3409 last year. And we want to assure that whatever we have in Portland is complementary. So in the meantime, for the current proposal, we are re-engaging stakeholders, and this public comment period is just on filling that multifamily energy reporting data gap. So this is not new in the United States. Over 41 cities and 6 states already have been implementing energy reporting for multifamily. And that includes all of the major West Coast cities with the exception of Portland. So our proposal then is to expand our commercial program and to commercial reporting and disclosure with a map to include multifamily residential buildings, 20,000 square feet and larger. That would add another 1,600 buildings to the reporting program. And again, the type of information that would be reported are things like Energy Star scores on that 1 to 100 scale that allows for some comparison and also year over year progress for a property manager to see their progress, energy use and carbon emissions. The timeline for reporting is a phase-in proposal, and we did this for commercial buildings as well. We worked very closely with the Building Owners and Managers Association of Oregon on the policy development for commercial. And what we heard is that buildings 50,000 square feet and larger typically have a property manager who may have some staff time that they can put into reporting every year. Between 20 to 50,000 square feet, sometimes that is just a mom and pop type of ownership and not a designated staff person to help. So our proposal is to start on Earth Day 2026, which is Earth Day is when the commercial program reports as well, and start with the larger buildings first, and then the following year phase in the smaller buildings in 2027. And then the reporting would continue annually thereafter. So I wanted to note that for the commercial program, we already have quite a bit of compliance assistance and resources that we would extend to the multifamily program. And we've already secured federal funding to double our city staff capacity over the next 3 years to launch a multifamily program and generally focus on multifamily decarbonization policies. But the resources they currently have that you met Brian earlier, who leads our energy scoring programs and help desk. That help desk includes somebody live who can receive questions as they come up, but also to make individual appointments. So that Brian, for instance, meets with commercial building managers for half-hour appointments at a time. Often that's all the time that's necessary to really wrap up their reporting. There is also compliance guides that we have that have step-by-step instructions on how to comply. So one is a guide for new users who are not familiar with the EPA software that we use, and then also a version for returning users, which is about a page long. I wanted to also note that we coordinate very closely with the utilities to receive aggregate building energy meter data, or sorry, not for us to receive it, but for the property manager to receive it. The City of Portland also complies with the commercial policy, so we often use the same service, where the utilities, without any tenant interaction necessary, will aggregate the whole building energy use into a spreadsheet that is easily uploaded into the software. So that really streamlines this process. With consideration of that in our commercial building experience, we estimate that this will take for the larger buildings 2 to 4 hours of staff time per building per year. There are, although it's not very common, there are cases where commercial building owners in the past have hired out professional services to have this done, and that's roughly $1,000 to $2,000 per building. But again, this is, especially with the energy reporting help desk, we can help with that reporting, set up a one-on-one appointment if you'd like, and also help with the initial setup, which is a couple hours more in the first year. For the smaller buildings, it takes less time. And so we estimate about 1 to 2 hours of staff time per building per year. And then if you have a portfolio of buildings, there's quite a bit of savings. The software is actually called Portfolio Manager, and it's designed to capture the energy use and report to cities to capture the entire portfolio at once. Okay, I just wanted to highlight the goals before we jump into the questions. So a key first goal is to provide a baseline or sometimes called a benchmark for energy use and carbon emissions. And that can be beneficial to property managers. One, the old adage of that you can't manage what you can't measure. So having those measurements over time, understanding how their building is performing. And it can also attract outside funding. So state funding, federal funding, and in Portland, of course, we have the Portland Clean Energy and Community Benefits Fund, or PCEF, that the energy management tool can be used for. The second goal that I wanted to highlight is the transparency of information. So it's really to elevate the data through the map, like I shared earlier, so that folks outside of the building have a sense for how well it performs. So that can inform prospective buyers and prospective tenants before they make decisions within the market. And then the last bullet here, encouraging improvement within the market without requiring mandatory upgrades. So our proposal does not require any updates to buildings, and that's part of the reason why the costs are so low for compliance. But having the information out there, we hope does encourage some thoughtfulness, and we frequently connect folks to the Energy Trust of Oregon or other resources that are available, like the Better Bricks program through the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, that will help make some decisions on where cost-effective investments make sense for a property owner. And so we do hope to see that over time. This allows us at the city to measure our progress towards our goals and get a sense if we are meeting our goals or not. So we do have that information for commercial, but we don't have that for multifamily. Let's see, is there anything else I wanted to cover here before we go to questions? I think that's it. Why don't we go to questions next?
Great. Thank you so much, Vin. So I see we have a couple of questions, one of which I think we may hold until we get to the next discussion on tenant notice. But Eli, do you want to start with the first question? And then for anybody, I think a couple of people came in while Vin was presenting. And just to let you know, we're taking questions by chat. So you can find the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom window. And Vin, do you want to maybe stop sharing your screen so we can
Oh, yeah.
all see you and Andrea and
Thanks.
Eli? Perfect. Thank you. Go ahead, Eli.
Thanks. Vin, our first question is, if a condominium association has no commercial aspects and does not have units that it rents out and maintains, is the association responsible for this reporting per the proposal?
Yeah, great question. In the current proposal, that is there is inclusion of condominiums within the reporting, and this is the case in across the nation too for the other 41 cities, where the homeowners association would be responsible for the reporting, and then ultimately the compliance responsibility is with all the owners.
And the next question, I don't know if anyone in this room knows, but was not a comment on this proposal, but note that they have interest in pursuing wind or solar potential at the condo. Is there someone on staff that they can contact for assistance with that?
Andrea, would you like to field that question as the program manager?
Sure. I actually think we can provide some contact information, Anita, not from us per se, but I think that's a better question for Energy Trust of Oregon, and we can provide some contact information for that. Just give us a minute.
Thank you,
Thanks, Andrea.
Andrea. And the next comment, quote, compliance for owners. What does that mean? Your slide states state building compliance.
I can clarify that. That was, Vin, you just said a minute ago that you would work with HOAs for compliance, and then you said the HOAs would have to get owner compliance, or did I misunderstand that? What did you mean by that?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so for our commercial program, we do have condominiums as well. So there are condominium ownership scenarios for commercial buildings. And so we coordinate the compliance through the homeowners association so that we have somebody directly to email. So for the commercial program, for instance, all of the compliance notices go to the ownership. Ultimately, it's the ownership that needs to be responsible. But as we coordinate compliance, we work with property managers. In the case of condominiums, often it's the condominium association or their property manager. And it's just for ease of administration that we like to have a primary contact to coordinate through email rather than just sending letters to owners.
So if there are other questions, I just want to invite you to put them in the chat. We have at least 5 to 7 more minutes scheduled for Q&A on this specific energy reporting requirements piece. And I'm going to also put back into the chat. If you came in late, you might have missed the first link to the Portland Map app. So for those of you who have just arrived, I want to remind everybody that the comments that you're asking are fantastic, and the purpose is to elicit answers from city staff, but those essentially stay in this meeting. And if you want to make a comment on the policy itself for the consideration of these policymakers, you need to do that through the link I just put into the chat. Important distinction. Eli, it looks like we have another comment, so I'll turn the floor back to you.
Thank you. So the next one is another clarifying question. Is the association responsible for ensuring that the owners abide by the mandate in this proposal?
The owners are responsible for reporting. And so building ownership is the cleanest way for us to implement our home energy scoring programs, as well as our commercial building energy reporting programs, because in the case of property managers, that's often shifting. However, the association is who we coordinate that responsibility with. because imagine the case of a condo ownership and there's 500 condo owners. For us to directly try to coordinate what might take 1 to 2 hours of time per year with 500 different people can be very challenging. So therefore, we really work through the associations in the case of condos. Does that help clarify?
So we can just pause and wait another minute or two if anybody has questions about the energy reporting requirements. If you think of a question later, even if after we've moved on to the other piece of this policy, you're still welcome to put it in the chat, and we will ask Vin and Andrea to come back to it if we have time. So any more questions?
Great questions. I appreciate the nuance around condominiums and homeowners association. And it has been, these policies have been implemented in, as I noted, 41 other cities. And so we have models of how to make this work well for folks. There was a question though about, is there anything we can do about skyrocketing utility costs? There is, for another meeting though. So, that is of course, a shared concern. And that part of what I'm going to go into is the concern of utility rates, and what the trends that we're seeing currently are something we've been considering for years. So why don't I go into the next section here.
And hold up 1 second. We have a few more questions that have arrived, and I think it would be wise of us to take 4 or 5 minutes and just address them. Since this is all fresh in everybody's mind.
So one question is about how this might affect duplex, triplex, fourplex, etc., that are not commercial. I think that will largely be addressed, but I don't know if you want to make any mention of that.
Yeah, I think this does go to another question
distinction.
from Reagan in the chat. Does this apply to duplexes? So the energy reporting, and that includes carbon emission reporting, is only proposed for 20,000 square feet in larger buildings. This next section I'm going to go into would apply to all duplexes and larger, which is really rental information to inform prospective tenants. So I'll get there next. Or Andrea, did you have a clarification?
Yeah, Reagan, there isn't an adopted program for this yet, so we don't have any forms, and we're not. It's not live yet. This is just it's in a proposal phase. So I'm not sure what you're trying to open, and we can maybe meet with you separately to try and figure out what's happening. But yeah, we're not at the phase yet where we're like actually getting people to comply yet, because city council hasn't considered this is a precursor step to getting consideration at city hall. So does that make sense?
Yeah, and I will note that my email address and phone number is on the main webpage too, if you want to reach out that way. Oh, and thanks, Brian, for noting how to make an appointment with the help desk. So that would be for the commercial energy reporting currently, but if this proposal is successful, then we would expand it to cover multifamily.
And I think Eli, one more question from Rachel, and let's address that, and then we'll move on to the tenant notice piece.
Yes. Has there been any further work with the utility companies to provide access to aggregated residential data on their online platforms with real-time data updates rather than having to request through email retroactively?
Great question. So I mentioned that the utilities will aggregate the data and put it into an Excel spreadsheet or another format, whatever is simplest for the property manager, and then that gets uploaded. So in many ways, that is very streamlined versus going to the tenants to get the data, but can it be improved on? For sure. So the EPA just recently has a whole new campaign to further streamline the whole building energy data aggregation process. So we are looking forward to what comes out of that. PG has been very proactive, and they didn't quite get it set up this year, but they are creating a system that is more web-based to obtain your information. But currently it is emailing and then making the requests and then getting a response from the utility.
Great. Thank you, Eli, for fielding those questions. Thank you all for these excellent questions. So now we want to turn to the second piece of this policy, which is about tenant notice. And so again, we'll take the same format. Vin will give us a short presentation outlining the key elements of the proposed policy, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So again, encouraging you questions about this reporting requirements or anything you're hearing that you want to ask questions about, please put them in the chat. That button is at the bottom of your screen. And again, I see one or perhaps two people have just come in, and to remind you that questions are great, but comments need to be provided through the Map app, and I'll drop that link back in. So Vin, the floor is yours again.
Thanks, Marty. How's that looking? You see the questions page? Okay. Okay, so next I want to describe another aspect of the proposal. And this really comes out of that community engagement I mentioned earlier, thinking about are there intersectional benefits when we're looking at climate policy that could extend to especially low-income renters in Portland. So the proposal then is at time of application before they rent is for building owners to provide notice of key climate and health information. So that includes instructions on how to access monthly energy costs per apartment unit from the utilities. So these are instructions that would that the city of Portland would work closely with the utilities and on what their policy is and how that works. And then we would have that on a web page that can be referenced. So the owner would not have to find this out themselves, because sometimes the utilities change their process. Currently, all three utilities have the same process. So when I rented most recently, I called Northwest Natural and PG to just the regular customer service line. I let them know which apartment I was interested in renting, and they provided both the average monthly cost and the peak monthly bill for the previous tenant over the last, and actually several tenants over the last 2 years. So that gives me a sense of how much the cost may be. Another aspect I want to point out too is that there are quite a bit of resources for low-income renters. So there's a new utility income qualified bill discount program. And so we would want to also include in the notice the various programs like that, as well as energy assistance for high heating bills especially, but also weatherization opportunities that might be available. So these are all resources that we would list on a city web page. Yesterday we had a great comment of could that be in a pamphlet? And I like that idea too, to have it printed as well as a web page that then the property owner could reference. Similar to that would be health risks associated with using natural gas or electric stoves and the benefits of ventilation. So this is really to inform cases where somebody may have asthma or asthma within their family as they're looking for a place to rent, and to make sure that folks are aware, particularly with natural gas combustion indoors, that there's a significantly higher risk of nitrogen oxides affecting and exacerbating asthma and other health conditions as well. So the city would have that information working with Multnomah County Health Department, and then also include the benefits of ventilation when it's operating correctly, and to note whether or not that ventilation is going to the outdoors. So there's parts that the city would hold in a web page, and then there's information that would be important for the property owner to share with the prospective tenant that this ventilation is working or not, and does it go to the outdoors. So especially in housing that is serving low-income renters, we had heard through our community engagement that sometimes the ventilation is just recirculating gas stove pollution or electric stove pollution within that space. The other key piece of information we'd like to be shared with the prospective renter is the types of air conditioning that are available, whether that's a window unit or central AC. So I mentioned in the case of where I was looking renting, there was actually 2 air conditioners, one per bedroom that were provided, or I thought were provided initially. And the landlord said, no, that doesn't come with this unit. That's left over from the previous folks. So that's a key distinction as folks start to prepare for future heat waves. And then in addition to that is passive cooling. So passive cooling are measures that make a building more energy efficient and also reduce cooling bills. So very important to low-income renters, of course, especially if they're getting air conditioning for the first time, is to know how much, or to get a sense for how much their bills will be, but also does it come with methods to try to reduce that cost? So that's things like double pane efficient windows, awning covers for the windows. Actually, just looking at my window right now, I have an awning that I can take down and put up on the outside in my rental. And then another option is cool roofs. There are other ideas out there too, but these are the three that we're looking at right now. So cool roof is a white reflective roof that significantly cools or prevents the building from heating up. So that's the information that we are proposing for renters. There's also an inventory that we are proposing that would go to the city once per year. So this would be based on the number of units within a building. For the property owner would need to submit annual stove and number of stoves, natural gas, electric, ventilation systems, and whether or not there's air conditioning provided and cooling measures. So this helps us to understand if we are making progress towards our goals that are not just climate goals, but intersectional with our equity goals. In total, if we look at duplexes and larger, this proposal would cover about 143,000 apartment units. We don't expect it to take much time because there are already currently notices that are required for the city. So that is, we're just adding on to an existing process. And I did want to note also that in Chicago and Minneapolis, they have had rental energy disclosure policies for many years. So we have that model to work with. Unlike Chicago and Minneapolis, we do have units that don't have air conditioning. And so in those places, it's much, much more common. Chicago had a pretty intense heat wave in the 1990s, and since then, air conditioning is a standard practice. In Portland, we have not had as severe heat waves until 2021, where during the heat dome, if you're here for that, I'm sure you remember because it was so striking. It was the original, the previous record was 108 degrees in Portland, and we actually got above 108 for 3 days in a row and actually reached 116 degrees. And that's just at the airport. So in other communities in Portland, it was much higher into the 120s and even the 130s, depending on how much vegetation there was around. So in total, 72 deaths in 2021 due to heat stress. 58% of those were in rental apartments. So that's part of our focus on rentals. In addition to that, like in my case, my neighbor across the street who's elderly actually had heat stroke and was picked up and taken to the emergency room. So there was 257 heat illness visits in 2021 as well. As the Multnomah County impact report notes, lack of air conditioning was a key driver. So that's why we are wanting to start to inventory who has access to air conditioning, and for property managers to be really clear when somebody's looking for a rental, whether or not that air conditioning is actually provided and maintained by that company. Okay, so in terms of timeline, we would like to start the disclosure to prospective tenants in 2026. The following year, start the inventory reporting to the city, and following that same Earth Day timeline to be in alignment with the other reporting due dates for energy reporting. And then the annual inventory reporting would be continue every year, and then the notification to prospective tenants would actually be continuous starting January 1st, 2026. So before jumping into questions again, I just wanted to cover the overall policy goals for the Climate and Health Information Notice. So a key first goal, as you've been hearing, is to inform renters of indoor air quality health risks and also their potential utility bill expectations. And I mentioned earlier, this does relate to displacement. because especially the winter heating bill can be so high for folks that have an energy inefficient apartment and costly systems like baseboard heat. They might not be prepared if they haven't had that before, and then all of a sudden they get hit like this with a really big bill, like this last winter when we had a very severe cold snap. And that bill, if they are unable to pay that bill and need to take out a loan, can lead to economic spiral, eventually leading to displacement. So that's what we're trying to avoid here. Increasing housing security is especially important in winter, but also that could apply to air conditioning, especially when somebody's using it for the first time in summer. And then lastly, here in supporting resilience to climate change, this really helps prospective renters confirm whether air conditioning is provided with the apartment and if there are measures to help reduce those cooling costs in the summer. All right, so as I wrap up, I wanted to note that more information leads to better decisions and health benefits. As we referenced labels, nutrition labels, for instance, this is the concept for this proposal. And also energy information can help us make wiser decisions. And I think I'll probably have some sense of what the miles per gallon are in a car when we're purchasing it. And that's because of labeling and sharing the information in the marketplace that is required on a federal level. And similarly for buildings, we want energy information, energy costs to be highlighted for folks to know what they might be getting themselves into, especially for renters before they rent. All right, so why don't we go into the next question?
Vin, thank you so much for that clear and concise presentation. So for this portion, Michelle DePass with BPS will be fielding questions. And I will just note that we appreciate all your questions, and we've also had some answers coming in the chat from city staff. So I think what we'll do in order to save time, and we have about 10 minutes or even slightly more for this question and answer period, I think, Michelle, we can just not ask out loud the questions that have already been answered in the chat. And I'll just direct everybody to scroll through that chat to see some of the other Q&A that's taking place. So we could start with Todd's question.
Okay, about the monthly cost of utilities? Okay, so the monthly cost of utilities for a home is dependent on the people or persons who live there. For instance, our water bills fluctuate year to year because some people use more water than others, and I'm sure that that's the same for electric usage. So how is that? There's not a question in the chat, but how is that handled and addressed?
Yeah, great question. I appreciate that there is a lot of variation between energy use from one unit to another. The intention here is to inform folks of what their potential may be. And so an example I'll start with is the home energy score. That one's based on assets within the home. This is the current program that we administer. And we have an energy cost estimate that's based on averages. But of course, within our homes, there's a lot of decisions. What's the occupancy? How many people are there throughout the day? What's comfortable? And so where are there set points for their temperature? So those averages give you a sense. In the case of, for this proposal right now, that it's fairly expensive though to have energy scores done. It's $150 roughly per home. So on an apartment unit scale, that would be a lot of apartments to require scores for. So instead, we are proposing a simpler format that already exists, which is to go to the utility and get a sense for the previous tenant. Now, it may seem, of course, there's some variation, but if there is baseboard heating in a very energy inefficient apartment, that will stand out compared to a newer apartment that is very well sealed, has insulation, and has a modern HVAC system. So modern furnace, for instance. And so, yes, there is some variation, but between systems and energy efficiency of homes, it will still stand out. So we want people to be aware of that before they get into a potentially dire scenario.
Thank you. The next question is regarding someone that lives in a duplex that doesn't have tenants, but rather two owners that have formed an HOA with each other. Will they be responsible for doing this energy assessment?
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, these are owner occupied.
Yes.
Yes, so there's well, first, energy reporting only applies to 20,000 square feet and larger. The tenant notice only applies to prospective renters. So if you're in an owner occupied duplex, it doesn't apply. It's just to inform renters.
And to
Thank you.
further Brandon's question, like, so we aired why you got a notice, possibly incorrectly, is because we cast a wide net rather than a smaller net. So if you want to move on with your day, thank you for being here, but sorry about that.
And Michelle,
Thank you, Andrea.
Todd had a couple of kind of questions and comments, and those are interesting and helpful, Todd. I would like to skip down, Michelle, to Regan's question about penalties for non-compliance. Michelle, if you want to go ahead and read that, and I think, Andrea, you wanted to take that question, correct?
Thank you. Thank you, Marty. So aren't there penalties in the proposal for non-compliance?
And I actually, Vin, if you could outline what the proposal actually says, I don't have that part in front of me. That might be helpful, but or drop it in the chat. But what I will say is that the code is usually written, the proposed code is usually written with giving the authority of the city to enforce through penalty. We usually don't use that. And I think what I want to convey to everyone on the phone is that we're not intending for this to be kind of a stick kind of a program. Usually when we have a help desk or some form of assistance for building owners or property managers to come into compliance, they are able to do that. And in all of the years that we've been running the other energy benchmarking and scoring programs, we have not issued fines. We've helped remind folks through warning letters. And so that there's just not an authority we tend to exercise. But usually the code will have some provision for that if something egregious happens. But our goal is to really provide more assistance and help to get into compliance rather than to be punitive.
Thank you. I have a question here about.
So I think there was something that you wanted me to speak to as well on that, Andrea. So currently in the code proposal, the proposal is the same for commercial program, which is up to $500 per day of a penalty. And so that is in line with the other types of penalties that the city has that are building related. However, I just want to reiterate in the 9 years that we've had the commercial energy program, we have not given a single violation, just warning letters. And the warning letters really come later in the process. I believe we're just for the commercial program, we're just starting to get those ready, and that the due date was over a month ago. So our goal is really to connect directly with folks, the property managers, to help them comply. When we get to the warnings of the property owners, usually that's enough to inspire some connections so that we can help folks comply. This method has resulted without any penalties of having a 90% compliance rate. So we feel like it has been very successful, but there is the potential for penalties in the proposal.
Thank you, Vin. The next question is curious about when you'll talk about the requirements for smaller units like, 4 or under, quads, triplexes, and how the requirements apply to those buildings.
Yes, a good question for these smaller buildings. The energy reporting, which is the part that really would take a few hours or several hours per year, that is really intended for 20,000 square feet and larger. And part of the purpose on that is that if we just look at the buildings that are 20,000 square feet and larger, we get to 80% of the entire commercial and multifamily building sector emissions once we have the two combined. Half of our carbon emissions in Portland are just from buildings. So this is a really large representation. So we're not really proposing many requirements at all for these smaller, less than 20,000. The proposal there is the tenant notice part. That was the second half that I shared. And this would be adding on to the existing tenant notice requirements of the city. So it's really, if you are renting parts of a quadplex, for instance, then prospective renters would need to be informed as they are currently informed for other city requirements regarding tenant right to know.
And can I jump
Thank
in?
you.
Can I jump in really quickly and just say,
Sure.
because Vin, I think you're also addressing Lizzie's question about owning 3 buildings, each of which are under 20,000 square feet, but each of which have 3 separate units. So Lizzie's saying, does this proposal apply to me?
Yes, the energy reporting requirement would not apply under this proposal. It's really as a individual building has to be over 20,000 square feet. But if you were to rent the building, then the tenant notice requirements would apply.
Great. And Michelle, do you want to pose Rachel's question from 1242 about
Yes,
the cooling units?
that's the next one. Thank you. Regarding climate and health reporting requirement 17.110.040B4, regarding the number of residential rental units cooled by air conditioning supplied by the owner. Sorry, I'm struggling with the chat today.
Do you want me to keep reading it?
Can you clarify whether this covers permanent and non-portable AC units only, or does it cover reporting on portable units provided by owners as well, for instance, PSEF units? The former is relatively straightforward. The latter would require regular unit inspections to verify air conditionings issued in past are still present and functioning as intended, as they tend to disappear with the resident, even though they are intended to stay with the unit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question, Rachel. And you can see that you're in the practice right now of working with those units. I would think for regulated affordable housing. So that level of detail would come through administrative rulemaking. So the ordinance that we're proposing right now is not at that level, but it is a valuable comment going into our process right now. So I do encourage you to comment on your experience. And potentially we will adapt the ordinance to reflect this very unique case. But I would think that we would do this in administrative rulemaking, where we currently the thinking is permanent, just to clarify, rather than portable. There is a unique situation though where PSEF is providing portable units right now. And so because that's coming from the owner, usually the portable units are delivered directly to the tenants. But in the case of regulated affordable housing, the property owner can receive those units. And it's not clear to me like what the responsibility is. If PSEF is providing those with the intention of if you receive them, that they will continue to be maintained, then maybe we should, through administrative rulemaking, consider that. But it sounds like in your experience, that's not the case. So I would think that it would fit in as a portable unit that's not covered.
I've got another question. Thank you, Vin. The burden and potential penalties for a small landlord are likely to lead to further mom and pop landlords selling their properties or raising rent. Other Portland regulations like ORS 30.01.085 covering move-out assistance acknowledge this and have a carve-out for mom and pop landlords, such as those in an owner-occupied duplex or with an ADU. Was this considered for the tenant notice proposal? And if so, why was a carve-out not included?
Yeah, then I'll start on this and maybe you can tag team off of me. I appreciate that, Ashley. And certainly our goal here and our intent is not to put any more mom and pop landlords out of business. We understand the importance of those in our housing mix. And so through public comment, we would be certainly considering certain hardships and exemptions for specific cases. But generally, just notification that Vin was talking about for duplexes around the energy costs or the instructions on that. And the inventory gathering is something that we feel is, at least at this time, something that duplexes and triplexes could comply with without threatening their business model, because we're not really, I think it would be a very unusual for us to fine a small mom and pop shop for not complying with this tenant notice in the first year, second year, as we're learning. And then as we track, and if there are like, egregious situations of flagrant non-compliance, then we would consider it then, but that's not how we're intending to come out the gate. And just, we're really committed to keeping as much of this housing stock in play, and just making it better and having tenants have better information about them is really the only goal. Vin, please add on to anything if you.
Yeah, well, there was a question in there too for owner-occupied duplex. So that does not apply to owner-occupied because it's for rental notice. For a separately attached ADU, it does not apply either, but for an attached ADU that is essentially a duplex. So if that ADU is rented, then it would apply at time of application for the renter. But yeah, just to reiterate that this is really about increasing information and education within the rental market at time of application to inform folks before they rent. The administration enforcement, I'd say, for the tenant notice is very unlikely, especially in the first years, because the intention is really to build knowledge. In the case of energy reporting, it's for 20,000 square feet and larger. That's where we had set up the penalty structure that we have not used for commercial yet, but takes several years per year. But that is the level of where we, if we were to have some type of violation, that we would focus first. And in the experience of how we're thinking about this for the tenant notice, we think of it as like so simple that it should not be that hard for mom and pop. So energy reporting for the larger buildings is a bit involved, could take a couple hours. But for tenant notice, it's just referring to the web page of here's what tenants should have as they make decisions, or a pamphlet if that's easier. And it that simplicity is for the reporting of the inventory of natural gas stoves and air conditioning. We really envision this as an online form once per year. Go online, and this is all it should be at the fingertips of folks, especially for smaller buildings. So maybe 15 minutes per year, something like that.
Michelle, I think want to save at least 1 minute for closeout. So do you want to, maybe we can ask the clarifying question about tenants. Maybe I'll just ask it since we're short on time instead of directing you. Question for you about for the reporting and the notice purposes. Does this include tenants who are commercial tenants in commercial spaces, but in multifamily mixed-use properties?
Yeah, great question. So multi-use is included. So currently with commercial, if the floor area of the building of 50% or more is used for commercial purposes, then reporting is required. Because we do have some buildings where there's 50% or less than 50%, but close to 50% residential, and then mostly commercial, we actually do get multifamily reporting through that requirement right now. What would happen now with this proposal is now we would get the rest of the reports coming in. So buildings where that are mostly residential but have like first floor commercial or first and second floor would then be captured by that proposal. So it is an expansion of the commercial program for mixed use.
And let's do one last quick question, Michelle, if you don't mind if I steal the floor from you. Anita was wondering, kind of just FYI, could a multifamily building right now go in and do commercial energy reporting if they want to kind of get ahead of the game and set their baseline?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, so this is a standard best practice within the commercial industry, and it has been expanding to the multifamily world. It's slower to uptake unless there is a policy, like in the other 41 cities that do have these kinds of policies. It is a standard best practice at this point. But there are multiple property owners in Portland that already have this practice for energy management. And if they get 75 or higher, they have Energy Star certification, and they highlight that in their building information that this is a high-performing building that would have relatively lower bills for tenants. So that program is through Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And I would guess, Brian, could you drop a link on how to sign up for that software? So that would prepare you for not just for the proposal here, but also for the state. And hopefully we provide some insight into energy management. So I'll just share an example as we wrap up here. So on the miles per gallon of a car, if you track that miles per gallon over time, I've done this before, you can see when your car has an issue or needs a tune-up because the miles per gallon starts to drop. So that's the kind of information you can get out of Portfolio Manager that isn't required to share with the city, but provides some insight to your building. At that, oh, it's time. I'll stop speaking.
Thank you, Vin. Andrea, do you want to, in our last minute, just tell everybody about next steps? And I, again, am dropping the link to the map up. I see some of you have thoughts on this. And so we want to remind you that to have those fully registered, you need to put them into the map app. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that this was our second public meeting. We did another one last night. The public comment period will remain open through June 14th. I know there were a lot of things in the chat we couldn't quite address in the time. So again, please put those comments in the map app. We do consider them, all of them. We will read every single one. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. We appreciate your questions and for being here.